and welcome to a brand new Arseblog Arsecast right here on Arseblog.com. How are you? Hope you're well. It's been an interesting week, that's for sure. An eventful week. We have got a brand new head coach at Arsenal Football Club. Arsene Wenger is gone. Unai Emery is the man who is going to take us forward in that position as head coach. I'm bringing this podcast forward from Friday to Thursday simply because of what a huge development this is. What a big thing it is for the football club. The Arsene Wenger era is over. A new era is beginning. It is a different era, a head coach rather than a manager. We have put in place structures to support this new head coach. And, you know, if you've listened to this show or read the blog for any period of time, you'll know this is something that I've wanted us to do. It's felt necessary for us to do in order to move beyond Arsene Wenger because of the difference in the way that he manages and Unai Emery is going to manage. We can still talk about management as a thing even if he is going to be the head coach. You know, we've put in place a director of football. He is a director of football, head of football relations, whatever you want to call him. He's not that. He is the director of football. That's Raul Sanllehi. We've got a head of recruitment, Sven Mislintat, who will identify and target the players for the director of football and Ivan Gazidis as chief executive to do the deals over. We've got a new contracts guy. We've got a new head of high performance, Darren Burgess. Where we are now compared to where we were 12 months ago is chalk and cheese almost. You know, I know a lot of people said Arsene Wenger could have gone and should have gone after winning the FA Cup, but as a football club, we were not prepared for it in the same way that we are now. So I've got to give credit to the board and to the people making those decisions for getting us ready and for giving us good people, hopefully good people. We're assuming they're good people, but I think the experience that they have, Sanllehi at Barcelona and also at Nike, Mislintat at Borussia Dortmund. Darren Burgess is bringing new and innovative ideas into the football club in terms of fitness and high performance, etc., etc. You know, this is maybe where we needed to be 2 years ago or 3 years ago, but better late than never. And we've brought in an experienced head coach. The idea of Mikel Arteta was one which people got behind because it felt romantic, but also because we just wanted it to work so badly. Whoever was going to be in charge of the team, I think we all wanted it to work. But when it comes right down to it and you ask anybody objectively, what's the best idea? Is it to appoint someone who's managed lots of games across a number of teams, who's had ups and downs in his career, but is still 46 years of age, and in the grand scheme of football coaches or managers, however you want to call them, that's still really young. Really young. It's about, I think, the same age, more or less, that Arsene Wenger was when he took over at Arsenal. Right? Mikel Arteta, however, has managed no games of football and is a young, promising, talented, intelligent, smart coach, but the fact he'd never managed a game of football in his life meant that it was going to be, for this Arsenal board and the Arsenal executives, a huge leap of faith and a huge risk, a huge gamble, over which there would have been no safety net. Under which, indeed, there would have been no safety net, I should say. So if it went wrong, it would have backfired on them completely. So for them, and for the football club itself, the sensible move was to appoint a man who's got some experience, who's won some trophies. It didn't necessarily go as well at PSG as he might have liked, but, you know, Arsene Wenger made a sidestep from Monaco to Grand Passat, Nagoya Grand Passat in Japan, and then came on to Arsenal and was hugely successful. You know, Arsenal are in a position right now where we need somebody to rebuild a little bit, to develop us as a team and as a club again. We've dropped out of the top four. We need to get back in there. Then we need to think about challenging for titles again. That's got to be the ambition, but we need somebody to take us there, to take stock, to redevelop players, to redevelop the team, to rebuild slightly and get us back on track. And I think Unai Emery fits that bill very well. I think he could make Arsenal better, and I think Arsenal could also make him better. So from that point of view, it's an appointment that makes a lot of sense. I'm excited, I'm energized, I'm curious, I'm interested. I'm fully behind the idea that he could come in and bring things to this team and this group of players that it hasn't had. Some different ideas, different philosophies, different ways of thinking, different ways of preparing for games, different ways of managing games as they're happening, all of that, and all the things that he might bring that we don't even realize yet. You know, it's impossible to sit here and not just feel better about where we're going and how we're going to get there. We can't say if it's going to work out. We really can't, but there's nothing familiar about it. There's nothing that we know deep down in our hearts is going to happen simply because it's happened before. There's no sense of inevitability about everything. You know, it's fresh, it's exciting, it's new, and people have been looking for change for some time now. And this is change. This is what it looks like. This is what it feels like. And it's a different journey. It's a different train. Let's get on board and let's see where the fuck it takes us. It could be brilliant. It might not be brilliant. It could be something in between. We just don't know. And that's a big part of why it's going to be exciting. It's a journey we don't know the destination of. We don't know how we're going to get there. So buckle up, strap yourself in and all the rest, and let's see where we go and where we end up. So we're going to do this podcast in two parts. In a moment, I'm going to talk to David Ornstein from the BBC, who was at the press conference yesterday and who obviously has got some inside track into what's been going on over the last few weeks at Arsenal. We'll talk to him about that. And afterwards, I'm going to talk to Colin Millar, who is a journalist. He's the editor of Football Espana. He's based in Sevilla, which is where Unai Emery had fantastic success, 3 consecutive Europa League titles with Sevilla. We're going to talk to him about what kind of a manager he is, what kind of a philosophy he has about football, what he can bring to Arsenal, and lots more besides. But first up from the BBC, it's David Ornstein. David, hi, how are you?
Yeah, really well, thanks, Andrew. Thanks for having me on again.
My pleasure. Just to address an issue that cropped up on Monday night, we were doing our live Arsecast extra in Union Chapel. We spent some time talking about Mikel Arteta, quite a lot of time talking about Mikel Arteta, on the assumption that he was going to be the new Arsenal manager or head coach, as it turns out the job description is. And then you dropped a tweet about 2 minutes before our halftime break with the bombshell about Unai Emery. So thank you very much indeed for that. I know it wasn't
necessary. Sorry for ruining the whole evening.
Yeah, it wasn't your doing. I know you didn't. You weren't the one that made the final decision. So I mean, the first thing that I would say is that Unai Emery is the new Arsenal head coach. It's an interesting appointment. I think there are many pluses to it when you look at the situation, and we might talk about those in a bit of detail in a couple of minutes. But I still think, without trying to play down anything or anything else, that the process and how they came to the decision is still quite interesting. And we spoke about Mikel Arteta on Monday night at Union Chapel because, as far as we were aware, that's what was going to happen. And I think as far as Mikel Arteta was aware, that's what was going to happen. And something shifted over the weekend, perhaps, to push Arsenal and the decision in a different direction.
Well, finally today we heard the timeline of events from Ivan Gazidis. We can only assume they were accurate and he was volunteering the dates in good faith. And that would suggest that Unai Emery had been a leading candidate for quite some time, and certainly since his interview on the 10th of May. I was surprised, really surprised, that he wasn't a leading candidate earlier. And given that he was available coming out of Paris Saint-Germain, he had won 5 trophies there in 2 seasons. You can say, well, he didn't go past the last 16 in the Champions League, but nor has Pep Guardiola at Manchester City. And previously to that, of course, we all know he won 3 consecutive Europa League titles. At Sevilla, the competition that Arsenal are playing in, he seemed to tick a lot of boxes. He would happily work within a structure, but he just wasn't being linked. And it was around that time. It was actually the 10th of May, bizarrely, and I can't quite believe it because I genuinely didn't know anything about his candidacy, that I looked it up, and he was 66-1 on that very day.
Wow.
And then a couple of days later, on the back page of the Daily Express, Neil Fizdler, on the final day of the season, what was that, the 13th of May, Arsenal away to Huddersfield, their back page splash was Gunners go for Emery. So perhaps something was beginning to emerge there. However, it still seemed Arteta was as the firm candidate, and that only gathered momentum. And my understanding was that Arteta was excited to be involved in the process. Going into last weekend, that they were confident that they really just needed the seal of approval to progress with formal talks. And this is where my information differs from some others, in that I understand that no agreement was reached of any sort with Arteta, but things were moving in the right direction, and we all know that they could have been put to bed very quickly with Arteta, which in itself raises a question. If they were so keen on him, why wasn't it put to bed quickly? There were reports of backroom staff being talked about. I'm not entirely sure on that, but certainly no agreement was reached. And then, yeah, come the weekend, I think Arteta was hoping to hear good news. And whether phone calls were missed or Arsenal went cold, as it's being reported, I'm not quite sure, but something certainly changed. And by Monday, it wasn't looking good for Arteta at all. And by this point, of course, we now know that Emery had been recommended to the Arsenal board of directors. I think the interest in Mikel Arteta was genuine. I think he was a leading candidate. He was a very serious contender. I don't think he was being used as a smokescreen. And in fact, I feel Arsenal today were perhaps wondering if they regretted not giving a bit more sort of guidance on the fact that Arteta wasn't as much of a leading candidate as the public consensus was building around him, as much as the public were being led to believe, because what Arteta was waiting for was the green light to progress with the meaningful negotiations, and they didn't happen. And we now know it was because Emery was the number one choice.
You know, it is, when you look at the timeline that Ivan Gazidis laid out, and I think the club obviously are right to do this when it comes to appointing a new manager, to say we've gone through this process, we have been professional, we've been rigorous, we've done our due diligence with all the various candidates, etc., and this is the best man that we've found from all of those candidates. You know, it's the right way to present a big decision like this. But do you feel perhaps that the presentation of that is maybe a little bit polished in comparison to what might have gone down over the course of the period of time since Arsene Wenger's departure was announced?
That's an absolutely belting question, and it's one I can't answer with total accuracy.
Yeah.
I would suspect that it was, perhaps, this is just a guess, slightly more polished than the reality, because if the version that was presented to us by Gazidis was completely factually correct, then blimey, fair play to Arsenal, and it's one of the slickest recruitment processes any organisation has ever seen. And given some of Arsenal's dealings in recent years, that would perhaps be a little bit of a surprise. But I've got no reason to believe it was shambolic or,
Sure.
As some have suggested, chaos. There was a lot of speculation, and Ivan Gazidis said today, and it was quite an interesting point because he mentioned it a couple of times. We did a separate interview with him afterwards, and he said it again. He said, "As I've always said, those who know won't speak, and those who speak won't know." And they seem very proud of how secretive this process was kept, how few leaks came out. And I'm sure they're not proud if there was misinformation out there, especially around Arteta. I'm sure that they're not proud that it was so secretive that misinformation got out there. But I think the only fair thing to say is there's a discrepancy between how smooth the process was, which I think it was probably fairly impressive, and what was being borne out in public, which was this notion it was a shambles. I presume it was somewhere in the middle. And to have appointed Emery so far in advance of their sort of informally stated deadline of the World Cup, the start of the World Cup, and to have got who I believe is the best available candidate in the managerial market at the moment, then they don't appear to have done too badly.
Yeah, I mean, where did you stand on the whole Mikel Arteta thing and the idea that he could come from being second in command at Manchester City, 2 years working with Pep Guardiola, I'm sure, is a fantastic education. But when you step back and you look at things objectively, never having managed a game of football and being asked to come in to take over at Arsenal, where you have this long-term manager who's had such an impact on the club, it always felt like a huge ask. It was a romantic idea, and I think while there were many people who were very skeptical of it, there were also people who went, well, if they've actually decided this and they've seen things in Arteta and they've interviewed him and they know what his football philosophy is and how he might work with players and all those things, you know, people were starting to get behind that simply because it was something new and it was something different, and it perhaps spoke to... It was either, as I've said before, there's sort of like a fine line between bravery and stupidity, and we weren't quite sure which one it was, but it was still really quite interesting. Where did you stand on that?
Yeah, I've got really mixed views on the Arteta situation. I've heard really good things, like most people, about him from Man City. It must be remembered that I don't think he is actually even the number 2. I think, you may correct me, he's possibly the number 3 at Manchester City. With just 2 seasons of coaching under his belt, it would have been a monumental gamble for Arsenal. And many people I've spoken to since the Emery news emerged have increasingly started to realise, in their view, that the Arteta potential appointment, would have seemed more and more of a gamble, is a polite way of putting it, and others have said to me ludicrous, as time has gone on. I think the warning signs that he was going to be a key contender were clear on the 20th of April when Ivan Gazidis addressed the media after news of Arsene Wenger's impending departure, and he talked about being brave and bold, and he laid out his criteria for somebody who represents Arsenal well and knows the values, is committed to working with young players, plays attractive football, and that Arsenal went for Arsene Wenger when very few people in this country knew him. And you know, you knew that the young Arsenal-related candidates would come to the fore as part of the selection process and consideration. And within that, Arteta and Ivan Gazidis get on extremely well. There was a story, I think, towards the end of his time at Arsenal about how he used some of the money collected for fines incurred by Arsenal players to buy Gazidis a watch. I could be getting that wrong, but somebody mentioned that to me a few days ago. So they were clearly close, and he was a candidate who was seriously considered. But I don't want to say that they bottled it. I think that's a harsh way of putting it when we are not privy to the negotiations that went on. But I feel as it dawned on them that they were having to put somebody on the touchline in the place of a manager who's been there for 22 years and ruled that club and helped construct the stadium and had his imprints in every single facet of the club, that it would be more sensible to go for somebody that had some experience of managing, which Arteta has zero, and certainly someone in Emery's case who has a proven track record. The only thing on the flip side to that is that I still feel, and it's pretty obvious, that Arteta would have slotted in easier to the structure. His English is perfect. He knows Arsenal inside out. He knows almost all of the staff there. He is friends with the likes of, he's got good relationships with the likes of Per Mertesacker. Some said that's not a good thing, and that they needed someone like Emery to come in and shake things up, and it shouldn't be all friendly. I don't really buy that with Arteta, because I don't think he would have been a friendly character. I don't think it would have been the easy way out for players. If anything, he might have worked harder to sort of upset the apple cart a little bit and make his mark. But my overriding feeling of it all is just that they've come to the right decision with what was in front of them and the available candidates. And the view of Arteta, as the more and more it's sinking in, is that he could well go on to be a great coach, quite a manager, head coach, call it what you like. He probably will. He has people who think so highly of him. You never know if that would be at Arsenal, Man City, elsewhere, but we have no evidence and no idea to suggest it. And if Emery doesn't go well, then at least Arsenal can say that they went for a proven winner and they did their due diligence and they got all the recommendations, did it the right way. It seems to be a decision that is now being supported by the vast majority of supporters after the initial shock, which led to a bit of division among the fan base from what I sense.
Yeah.
People seem to be galvanising behind the club that this was a good appointment. Those who know him from Spain and France seem to be effusive towards him. Whereas if they had gone for Arteta and that had backfired, then I think there would have been recriminations of a much more severe degree.
Yeah.
Because he had never managed a game in his life.
No hiding place, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, when we announced it, James announced it from the stage on Monday night, and there was just the only reaction was a few gasps. There was no applause. There was no great. This is that's good. Everybody had so bought into the Arteta thing that the idea of anyone else getting it at that point seemed a surprise. I'm with you. I think it's a far more sensible approach. And maybe when people look at it and they look at what they want Arsenal to be, and that's a team that can win the Premier League, and it's a team that might get back into the Champions League and do better in Europe than it has done under Arsene Wenger for the last number of years. I think that's perhaps something for the future. I think Arsenal need something that will bridge that gap in the meantime, and Emery seems like a manager who can do that. Obviously, he's only 46 years of age. It's still pretty young when it comes to a head coach / manager. He can improve. He can hopefully improve Arsenal as well. So I think it is a matter of getting used to the idea of this guy who, if you were told at the start of the process, you can pick this guy, you can pick that guy, you can pick that guy, I don't know too many people would have gone for Emery at the start. But in the circumstances, given the experience he has at Valencia, at Sevilla, not so great at Spartak Moscow, but at PSG, which is a strange club at the best of times anyway. I don't think it's a club at which you can truly measure his capabilities. It does seem like the most sensible appointment we could have made.
Some of the people I've spoken to who are close to Paris Saint-Germain, know the workings of the club well, have told me that it was the impossible job there for Emery. I mean, he still won 5 trophies in 2 seasons. And as we said earlier, the progress in the Champions League, it was halted by Barcelona and Real Madrid. And the last 16 stage is the same stage Pep Guardiola has got to in his couple of seasons at Manchester City. Also, I think if you offered most clubs Unai Emery or Mikel Arteta, there wouldn't even be a question. It would have been Emery straight away. And I know what you're saying about people, him not being the top of most people's list. But if you look at who was available, who was in the frame, clearly Max Allegri was a firm favourite with many fans and pundits and former players, etc. But aside from that, if you actually look at the credentials, maybe it's just me and a personal sort of preference, I didn't see too many available realistic candidates with the credentials that Emery had to fit in at Arsenal. It seemed with some people nobody was the right appointment, and it's one of the most fiercely speculated over jobs I can remember. The shock you mentioned, the sort of gasps, that was something I heard from the Arsenal Supporters Trust meeting as well. And I think that was born out of the fact that people had got their head round, as you say, the Arteta candidacy. But many of those were the same people that expressed surprise, indignation is probably the best way to put it, when Arteta's name came up in the first place. And so when Emery, with everyone sort of finally buying into the idea of this young former Arsenal captain coming in, the sort of mystique around someone that's never managed before, could he be the next Pep? Could he do something really special with this unique talent that everybody in the game has apparently talked about? It started to excite people, and then you hear it's Emery, and you kind of think, oh, you know, he's not one of the very highest leading names in the game. Most of his success has been qualified by suggestions that he didn't do well in another competition or something like that. And so I really felt that division that sort of emerged in the fan base on Monday night into Tuesday was really just born out of shock. And and you saw, you know, you heard Ian Wright on 5 Live. I think that's, you know, he started off in he was totally stunned by the news it was Emery. He didn't understand where that had come from. And by the end, he said it was nothing against Emery. He thinks he's going to be a really good manager for Arsenal. Yeah. But he was more shocked at the process turning him out of nowhere. But don't forget, him coming out of nowhere, coming up on the rails, call it what you like, was a kind of public conception. And that public conception is born out of really well-sourced reports from many of my esteemed colleagues in the media. But this is a process that was only really known about by those 3 people involved in it, and maybe a very small number of others. And if we refer back to that quote from Ivan Gazidis, those who know won't speak, and those who speak won't know.
Yeah,
and it seems that, however true, many of us have got different opinions on quite the extent of Arteta's candidacy. It seems that there was more to it than we know about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that quote might go down not very well with some of your colleagues, David, if I might be so bold as to suggest that.
And understandably, I do want to be clear that there is no way that the story and the quality and the caliber of journalists who work in the national media and particularly in this case, who report on Arsenal, their stuff is extremely well sourced, and I don't doubt, you know, the Arteta stories, the stories around others as well. Yeah. But I do think there is another side to this. Sure. I don't think Emery has just come completely out of the blue. I think there was clearly more to it than we all knew about.
Right, couple of quick ones before I let you go. First was just your impression of him at the press conference. We know his English is not great. He admitted that himself. I think you would go so far as to say it's fairly basic, but to go to a press conference in front of the national media, broadcast media, newspapers and everything else, and to sit there and to try and explain yourself in a language which is not terribly familiar to you, where you don't have the ability to find the best words perhaps to describe what it is that you want to say. You can get your point across, but there's nothing flowery about it or nothing terribly, I won't say impressive is not the right word, but I thought there was something fantastic about the fact that he was willing to do that. He was willing to sit there. I don't know anybody who's an adult who has had to learn a new language as an adult. There's something built into you that you feel embarrassed speaking a language that is not your own, even if it's one-on-one. And if you're doing it in those circumstances, it's even more difficult. So I was really, really impressed with the way that he handled that. And I thought he spoke in terms of what he was trying to say. We got the gist of it. I thought what he was trying to say came across very well. What did you make of him?
I thought he was fantastic. And that seemed to be the consensus from my other colleagues in the media. And then when I started to look and speak to fans as well, I thought he gave a really bullish performance, consummate really, given the circumstances. You raise a really good point about the language and that point about being embarrassed. Well, I certainly don't think he was embarrassed. No. He was speaking slowly. He was trying to grasp the right words, and clearly some of those have probably been sort of learned in very recent times. Yeah. There was a word he kept referring to when he was talking about Arsenal's style of play: protagonist. talking about how he wanted the team to play. He wants them to be protagonists. And like you say, he was actually somehow quite articulate, getting his points across, despite having a very limited grasp of the language. I was sat in the front row and I really was keen to study him. And he didn't flinch or show any kind of embarrassment, nerves. I've been in press conferences when managers have been presented for the first time, or even managers who have been at a club for a long time, and they twitch in their chair. I've had managers who have grabbed the knee of the press officer to try and move the question on. They've been red-faced. They've just been like a fish out of water. And I felt he was the complete opposite. I thought, considering that was a room packed with 99% of people who he'd never seen in his life, or didn't know at least, he really projected as well. He was powerful. It was like he was completely at ease with this stage, and this was a stage and a seat that has only known one home manager since the stadium was built. But he didn't seem overawed by it. Even when he put his earpiece in to listen to the English questions, I didn't see any kind of alarmist reaction, any glance towards the translator, who didn't even come up onto the stage. So confident was Emery in being able to get through. And he conveyed, especially when he spoke, he gave a couple of answers that were asked for in Spanish. It wasn't that he decided to break into Spanish. He was asked for answers in Spanish. And that's when he kind of came into his own a bit more, and you saw more of his passion and his personality. We've seen some of his reactions on the touchline, especially when he was Sevilla manager. And I think that's really going to excite the Arsenal fans, this intensity coming back to the club. And when he talked about, I'm just looking through some of the quotes now from what he said. Yeah. He talked about two things are very important to be protagonists: possession of the ball and pressing when we don't have it. He kept talking about that possession and then the pressing. And I think he's going to drill this Arsenal team. My sense, my gut, is just a personal feeling from hearing him speak, that he's going to drill this Arsenal squad to within an inch of their lives. Yeah. And many would say that's exactly what they need. I thought he was engaging. He didn't seek to duck anything. He didn't look away. He didn't pin anything on Gazidis to answer. In the circumstances, I thought he could not have produced a better performance on his first day in the job. It'd be interesting to see now how quickly his English develops ahead of pre-season training. I think it will develop pretty rapidly. They say the language of football is universal. I really don't see there being a problem on the training ground. There are some Spanish speakers as well to help him along if he needs. And I think, famous last words, of course, I don't think things could have gone much better so far. And I think it bodes really, really well for Arsenal, what we're seeing here. They surely, the hierarchy at the club, couldn't have hoped for this to pan out much better so far. Yeah. But of course, that will all go out the window on the weekend of August the 11th, when the Premier League starts up again. Final question. We have appointed a head coach, not a manager. So I think there's a very clear distinction there. Arsene Wenger was the manager of Arsenal Football Club for 22 years, and Unai Emery is being appointed as the head coach. And I think we can all see why. We've put these structures in place. Sven Mislintat is the head of recruitment. Raul Sanyehi is... he is the director of football. We can start calling him director of football. Head of football relations. Head of football. Director of football. He's the director of football. Let's do that. And obviously, I think it's fair to say that Ivan Gazidis is going to be more visible now than he was when Arsene Wenger was in charge. You only have to look at what's gone on in the last few weeks to see that. The manager, or the head coach, I should say, is one thing. But how this team then operate during this summer is going to be very interesting. It's a truncated
transfer window because of the new rules that are coming into play. Teams have to do their transfer business inwards anyway before the season starts. There's a World Cup going on. That complicates things. It's not just on Unai Emery now. It's for these guys, having put themselves in this position, having come to the conclusion that he is the best man to work within this structure. They now have to support him and give him what he needs to help him be as successful as he can be.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary time for the club, isn't it? If you think about all the things we've seen and are seeing. Go back to Ivan Gazidis' quote about that season being a catalyst for change, and what has followed since, as you say, head of recruitment, head of football relations, head of contracts in Huss Fahmy, head of high performance in Darren Burgess, Ivan Gazidis putting himself front and centre as the man on whose shoulders this project rests, really, hasn't he?
Yeah.
He was the man who stepped forward on the day Arsene Wenger decided that he would be going at the end of the season. Other clubs, we haven't seen a chief executive step forward like that. And it was clear that this was his moment. And then today, fast forward, and we've seen Arsenal release videos before the news conference of Gazidis leading Emery into the stadium. And these things are well planned and produced. Gazidis in Emery's new office, which has his name on already, presenting Emery with a book, the volume audible on this little clip, saying this is a book about the history of Arsenal. You are now a you're going to have a chapter in this book.
This is our tunnel.
Coming into the news conference, these constant sort of phrases like a new chapter in our history, etc. So this is really Ivan Gazidis' moment, and Unai Emery is a cog within that. This new continental structure, complete departure from the Arsene Wenger era in just a matter of weeks, although it has been building behind the scenes. Seeing that extraordinary turnover of staff before the new head coach had even been appointed. There was no. Well, we don't know if there was consultation on whether the head coach wanted those staff to be there or not, but he wouldn't presumably have known them particularly well, the likes of Colin Lewin. So these were decisions that were being made about Arsene Wenger's staff by the hierarchy, by the new continental model, while Arsene Wenger was coming to the end of his time before the new head coach had even been put in place. Yeah. And then comes the head coach. And it was even, as those appointments were being made over the last year or so, people were quite open inside the club. We've got a new head of contracts, a new head of recruitment, a new head of football relations, a new head of high performance. The only thing we haven't got is a new head coach, and it's just a question of whether that would be Arsene or not. But I sense that this was very much a targeted summer for change.
Yeah.
The more time has gone on, I really get that feeling. And then yes, the news today that Emery would be head coach. So how will it work? Well, he will be a key player, obviously, in the decision-making process. But for the first time in Arsenal's modern history, he won't be the only decision-maker. He will have the power of veto on presumably ingoing and outgoing players. But he is a cog in that sort of that management group.
Yeah.
And I think that's absolutely fascinating. I'm already being told that he is sort of aggressively trying to get across absolutely every part of the club. He's desperate to get to work and familiarize himself with people, with structures, with processes, and start to improve them. But in a departure from Arsene Wenger, he won't be improving them alone. He'll be improving them with primarily Sanlehi and Mislintat, Gazidis overseeing it all, and of course Hasfami and Darren Burgess.
Well, look, he's had a few weeks off after leaving PSG, so he doesn't need any holidays. He can get straight to work. He's got some work ahead of him, and we wish him the very best of luck. David, thank you as ever for your time. Fascinating.
Always
as
a pleasure,
always.
Andrew. Anytime.
Thanks as ever to David Ornstein. You can find him on Twitter at BBC Sport_David. Like I'm sure you're following already, but if you're not, that's where you will find him. Now, moving on, and to get an idea of Unai Emery, the coach, the manager, the football philosopher, and all that kind of stuff, it's time to talk to the editor of the Football Espana website, Colin Millar. Hi, how are you?
Hi, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be on. Thanks for having me.
Not at all. Now, you're based in Sevilla, which is where Unai Emery has had a great deal of success, but perhaps we could talk just a little bit about the start of his managerial career. As a player, I think his career was ended by injury. He was a journeyman. He spent most of his time in the Segunda division, but got into management pretty quickly, and it became obvious pretty quickly that he had something about him.
Yeah, absolutely. As you allude to there, his playing career was very much so. He started off in management very early in his career. At 33 years of age, he started managing Lorca, who are a tiny little club based in the south of Spain in Murcia, and he got them into the second tier of Spanish football, which is quite an achievement at the time. He almost won promotion to La Liga, but he just missed out, unfortunately, and it was then that he decided to move on to Almeria, who were in the same division, and he earned Almeria their first promotion to the top flight in 25 years, and it was an amazing achievement. And obviously in their first season they finished 8th, so it was an incredible year, because they didn't really have any expectations to the aim was to avoid relegation, but they actually just missed out on a European spot. So it was at that point that he really came to the attention of the wider sort of consciousness in Spanish football, and there was a number of clubs linked to him at that point in time. And he actually ended up going to Valencia that summer, and in Valencia as well. That's really when he started to make his mark in wider terms, and he had a great period of stability at Valencia. He spent 4 seasons there, which in Spanish football terms is quite a length of time, and he had 3 consecutive top 3 finishes as well. So, and that was it was a tough time for the club with a lot of budgetary constraints and cutbacks.
Yeah,
they had to sell a number of star players like Juan Mata and David Silva, but within that, he managed to do very well with the player losses and to keep things steady and progressing.
Yeah. The situation at Valencia, I don't think we can underestimate what a trying time it was for the club, because they were, I don't know if they were on the verge, but they were certainly building a new stadium. The money ran out. I don't know if that stadium has been built. Did they ever finish it?
No, they haven't. Actually, it's one of those. It is an incredible story of a white elephant stadium, and there is still hope and reports that it could be finished. But at the time, as you say, it was something that they poured millions and millions of pounds into, and there's a half-built stadium within the city that's still sitting there ready to be completed. But due to political restrictions and everything else, there's been a bit of a gridlock. But that was a time that, as you say, it really damaged Valencia, and it was also a time when Barcelona and Real Madrid were really starting to spend more than any other club in the world and to stockpile incredible squads. So in terms of a title challenge, it was virtually non-existent, but essentially Valencia were the best of the rest at that time, and it was an incredible managerial achievement to do that year after year. And again, it was just something that showed that Emery could take players and be like, well, if we are selling players, we have what we hold, and those players improved under him. Yeah. And that was a real mark of his career as well.
Was that the way that he did it at Valencia, was to deal with young players coming through, or did he buy cheap? Did he buy good players? Did he spot talent that could be developed? How exactly did he go about doing that? Because to finish third 3 seasons in a row with a club where you're selling your best players, and let's be under no illusions here, the players that he had to sell were really, really good players along the way. How was it that he managed to get that much out of a squad which was being weakened all the time?
Yeah, well, as you sort of said at the start, Andrew, that we have this sort of situation in Spain where it's a head coach rather than management. And that's the sort of approach and the model that Arsenal are starting to adapt. So within that, the sporting director is the guy that deals with the transfers, and Emery he's just the guy that's like, wait, I've got these players and my job's to improve them and to get these game plans that work. But when he did move to Valencia, he took a number of, I think it was 3 or 4 players he signed from that Almeria squad that he had, players that he could trust, and one of them is actually the defender Bruno, who's now at Brighton. And he was somebody that came into Valencia, and people sort of thought, these guys might not be what the guys that will meet our aspirations of finishing in the top 4 or 5 places. But together they built a really strong squad. And as I said about the cutbacks, you inherited a very strong squad, but there was a lot of restrictions within that, and it was a case of being able to sign players and work with a sporting director, which really worked not just very well at Valencia, but then at Sevilla, obviously with Monchi in the sporting director hot seat, and they had a very, very strong and productive relationship too.
Yeah, I mean that relationship, and obviously Monchi left subsequently to go to Roma, but he was widely regarded as one of the best in the business at spotting talent and bringing it into a club. How was his relationship with Emery? Did they gel together? Because it really is a crucial thing, isn't it? That whether you like the structure or not, if you have to work within it, you've got to trust. There's got to be some trust between the sporting director who's doing these deals and the manager. The sporting director kind of has to know what kind of players the manager likes to work with to an extent.
Yeah, absolutely, and the relationship between Monchi and Emery was very strong and very stable as well. Monchi had a number of interviews when Emery was in charge, and it's like, look, I want this guy to stay for years. He's the perfect man for this club, and you can just see that in the results. And we look at 3 back-to-back Europa League titles, which is when you actually look at that in the cold light of day, that achievement in itself is absolutely ridiculous. But people sort of look at that and say, well, yeah, Monchi was the mastermind. Monchi was the guy that was coming in, that was getting all these players, and yes, there were these seals, but the victories kept coming. But what people forget is that before Emery was appointed at Sevilla, they finished 9th 2 seasons in a row. And what he did was he came in, he changed the mentality, and he really brought them back up and starting to overachieve again. There's top 5 finishes in successive seasons, and obviously his 3 full seasons in charge, they each brought a Europa League title. So whenever people are like, well, yes, he was successful at Sevilla, but that was because of the setup and structure that was in place. That is partly true, but it was him that kind of got the real results out of that structure and made it into a really successful gelling team. And it was the tactics that he employed as well, and his philosophy worked so well there and worked so well with the club. In Sevilla, it's important to understand that Sevilla are quite an emotional club, and if you attend the match at their stadium, you can tell that from the fans and it's the energy that transmits itself onto the pitch. But that almost came from Emery as well. He's a very energetic and he's a very energetic individual, and it's very strange to say this, but his main strength is his hard work. I know you kind of think, well, yes, that's a manager's job, but it really does ring true in the sense that he is so analytical, and he is so there's a lot of tension and nervous anxiety that you can see from him on the touchline. But that's actually how he prepares his teams as well. There's a lot of tactical analysis, a lot of video analysis as well, and that's really drummed into the players. And he's very meticulous, he's very thorough, and all these things. He's very intense, and this sort of takes hold of his job. But that worked very well at Sevilla in the sense that the crowd and the pitch that were there. And you looked at their final season and in La Liga, and they didn't actually manage to win an away match throughout the campaign. There was 9 draws and 10 defeats, and people sort of pointed that and correctly so and be like, well, yes, that's the drawback of Emery. There's a little bit of a doubt over how he can do that. He can sustain his results in those circumstances, but their home record that season was superb, and that was how he managed to navigate them through the European competitions as well, by seeing what worked at a club and what worked within a squad, and then using that in the matches themselves, and the results did keep coming, and the successes kept coming as well. Yeah,
I mean, that will be slightly worrying to Arsenal fans who've witnessed the club go through a very difficult season away from home, but be great at home at the same time. But look, we're not going to project that kind of negativity on him. The 3 Europa League titles obviously is an amazing thing to have achieved. Knockout football is, it's not easy at the best of times. To win a cup is great, to win 2, fantastic, but 3, truly amazing. At the same time, there is the fact that in one of those seasons, at least, they came back down from the Champions League, having qualified for Europe's top table. Did the wins offset doubts people might have had in that regard, because you can be upset about coming down from the Champions League into the Europa League, but if at the end of the season you win a trophy, it's kind of, well, this is great, we've won a trophy and we've won it for a record number of times in a row. What was the reaction to, I suppose, his league performance, which was all right but not necessarily brilliant, and the fact that maybe he didn't do what he could have done in the Champions League with those players?
Yeah, no, it's a situation that within Sevilla and within Spanish football itself, as a wider sort of entity, every club and every set of fans know that they have a certain wall, certain ceiling that they can hit, and with Sevilla, a top 4 place would have represented a fantastic season within the league, and Emery missed out on that quite narrowly on 2 occasions in his first 2 seasons, and it was his 3rd season whenever the troubles and away from home really sprang up. They finished 7th, and there was a little bit of disappointment there, and there was a kind of sense that maybe this is the right time for him to move on, not in the sense that he, in terms of he wasn't up to the job anymore. It was just that maybe he needs a fresh sort of scenery, and the club needed that too, just a new sense of direction. But in terms of the Champions League, I don't think that there was any concern there, in the sense that the one season they failed to get out of the groups, they were in with Juventus and Manchester City. It was a particularly testing group, and I think there was a realisation that, like, you know, we're not going to be at that level quite yet. Obviously, they would have loved to have progressed, but it's just the way the season worked out didn't favour them. And as you say, when you drop back down to the Europa League, and we could see that with Atletico Madrid this season, is that there's a real focus. It's like, right, this is the competition we're in now, and we want the trophy. And I think that's partly down to the fact that both Real Madrid and Barcelona can dominate domestically to such an extent that domestic success is tough. But they sort of see this as a path. Like, we've got a real winning mentality. And Simeone drove that into his players throughout the Europa League. They played full-strength teams, and they really had the sense that, look, we're going for this. This is what we're prioritising. Yeah. That we want trophies. It doesn't matter if it's the Champions League or Europa League. At the end of the day, it's a trophy, it's success, and it's what the fans want, it's what we want. And that was very similar to what Emery did with Sevilla. And I think as well, it's important to recognise that, because a lot of people out there were like, yeah, well, Sevilla are a very good team, but winning the Europa League, you know, it's not the Champions League, and no, it's not. But whenever you have a set of expectations and a set of, like, what can we do to say, right, we're going to win this, and we're going to bring this home to the fans. And it was him really that wanted there to be a special connection between the fans, the club, the players. He wanted everybody in that together. And there's the fact that when he was at Sevilla, he made every new signing learn the club anthem and to sing it as well, because he wanted people to be involved. He wanted everybody to feel part of the club. Sure. And he spoke in as well in his first press conference of Arsenal, and he said about that with the players in the club. He wants to bring them together. He wants everybody to feel like they're part of something, and at PSG that was a lot harder to do, because essentially it wasn't the manager who was running the dressing room, and it's a bit of a basket case situation, which is sure far removed from what he had before and what he will have at Arsenal too. But in terms of working within a wider structure and bringing all those structures and pieces together, he did that tremendously well at Sevilla. He did it at Valencia, and he did it before at the smaller clubs at Almeria and Lorca too. Yeah. So he's really set himself up to work within this structure, and I think when he's appointed at Arsenal, we also that it's a bit of a surprise. It took everybody aback, but in the cold light of day, it's a very logical decision, because we can see the direction that Arsenal have moved in. They want to get away from this sort of the dogmatism maybe that has plagued them in the recent years, and that it does sound like a criticism. The fact that, you know, that Arsene Wenger was there, and he was the one who was deciding a lot of these issues aside from the coaching. He was deciding the transfers and how the club was moving forward. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but Arsenal obviously felt that we need a change, and we need to go towards this more continental structure. Yeah. And I think Emery's the perfect individual to really work within that, and to help the club grow, and to help bring people together and improve the squad that he has, and move in a direction that everybody can see. And I think that's what will happen as well. When
you talk about that and bringing people together, and man managing and discipline and things that a manager would like to instill within a squad. Where are his strengths and weaknesses in that regard? I mean, I think you're right to point out that PSG in the dressing room there, it's not a normal dressing room. You know, even aside from Neymar, there were things going on. But when he added Neymar, or when the club added Neymar, you know, it was just crazy the way the deal was done, the influence he has, the lack of accountability he has simply because of who he is and how much money's been paid for him and everything else. So I think it's not fair necessarily to look at his inability to manage that dressing room. But in other dressing rooms, what is his tolerance like for ill discipline? How does he try and bring players together? Is he a one-size-fits-all kind of guy? When there's a problem, you get to kick up the arse or the hairdryer, or is he a bit more subtle than that? I'm curious to your insight into this.
Well, again, this is something that Emery really works on, and he actually sort of was self-aware to correct mistakes in this regard. His one of his key objectives throughout his time in Spain certainly was to bring the squad together, group as a unit, for everybody to be fighting for each other and to be fighting in the same direction. Now, the most notable sense of that was at Sevilla when there was. It's fair to say there were no stars in the teams that he had, or certainly the stars fought for the team, and they had the same mentality as everybody else. There wasn't anybody sort of like, you know, we're the guy to take you forward. There was no big egos, and you kind of look at a lot of what the players said about him, who moves on to other clubs like Ivan Rakitic, Evan Banega, and Jose Antonio Reyes as well, who of course played for Arsenal. But they were all key components for that Sevilla side throughout those years, and they all spoke in glowing terms of how he managed them. There had been doubts before at in terms of how relentless his sort of persona could be, and there's a sort of term in Spanish, it's a pesado, which is essentially somebody who can be a bit can be very, very heavy in what they do. They can be a bit, you know, he loves to really drive, as we were speaking earlier, he really loved to drive the sort of DVDs and the analysis of games into players, and he would have sent them all home with these DVDs and said, all right, you're going to look at these, you're going to analyse them. And they were so dull and so dry that they would have showed things like goal kicks, like throw-ins, you know, things that players were not going to pay any sort of attention to. And he was aware to think, like, maybe a couple of these guys aren't all on board with this. And it was the famous incident with Jeremy Mathieu, who eventually signed for Barcelona, his French defender, and Emery thought, this guy he's not looking at what I'm analysing here. He's not looking at the DVDs I'm giving him. So there was one night he thought, right, I'm going to test you. So he gave him a blank DVD and he sent them home with it. And the next morning they all came into training, and Emery asked, so what did you think of the DVD? Have you learned anything from it? And the Mathieu was like, yes, it was very insightful, thanks very much. And it was at that point, like, right, actually, this might not be working with everybody, and there was another incident as well with Joaquin, who's now at Real Betis, who's also in Seville, but he was at Valencia at the time, and he's known as a bit of a practical joker. And whenever he was leaving the club, he's like, look, you know, there were so many videos that I ran out of popcorn. So it was a case of, you know, this is actually something that was getting rubbing players up the wrong way to an extent, and it's hard. There's certain players will take that on board, who want to learn, who want to say, right, I want somebody who can teach me what to do. But there'll be a lot as well who think, well, I already know what to do, and yes, I'm willing to talk to you, I'm willing to take on advice and look at your plan and learn. But it can be a bit much, and I think Emery recognised that as well. And at Sevilla, he actually said that I've changed my approach somewhat. Like, I'm going through the videos of the players themselves. I'm trying to interact more with them to make them understand this better. And again, it's a case of he goes over a point again and again and again until they get it absolutely right. He's a perfectionist. Yeah. So he really will drill these tactics into the players. He'll drill individual situations into the players. Sure. And whilst that's a lot of hard work and it's a lot to take on mentally for some people, eventually it does start to pay dividends. And yes, there might be one or two players who won't like that approach, who might think, you know, this isn't for me. I really don't want to be a part of this setup where this is being driven in this to this extent. But I think by and large, if he can get the sort of personalised aspect right, which I think he did at Sevilla, then I think that can be tremendously successful.
Sure.
And again, that has shown in individual matches on the European stage, especially with Sevilla, when they were bludgeoning through those quarterfinals, semi-finals. They were just winning. They were finding ways to win. They were producing the goods in key moments, and that's always of a result of very, very hard work and relentless practicing.
What, just before we finish, he spoke about, I suppose respecting is the wrong word, but talked about upholding the football tradition at Arsenal, which is possession-based attacking football. Is that where he has garnered his success? What sort of a tactical outlook does he have? If we talk about a man who pays a huge amount of attention to the opposition, and he analyzes them and he provides video analysis and everything else, it seems sensible that he's a guy who will try and negate some of the qualities of the opposition that he's playing. So does his team selection tend to change a little bit more than we might expect with Arsene Wenger, for example, who is much more into the idea of his players dominating the game through their own qualities? Is he going to change things around a bit, either in terms of his formation or his personnel, a bit more than Wenger used to?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, and it's really going to be borne out in the fullness of time. But in terms of philosophy, look, this is a guy who is the ultimate pragmatist. He will find any way to win that he can. He will try to exploit weaknesses in the opposition and play upon that. And he does have his own individual philosophy. He really likes his teams to press high up the pitch. He demands a lot of running from his players. And I know these are all cliches, but he likes his team to really attack as a unit, to defend as a unit. He likes to get his fullbacks pushing right up the pitch and helping to provide width into the box. So he has got those things. He tends to maybe be a little bit conservative in big matches. That has been a criticism sort of throughout the years, and we sort of saw that when we were talking about his away record in his final season with Sevilla, and also his record with PSG in the Champions League. But we see the sort of the 6-1 defeat to Barcelona, and that's what we associate Emery with. And I think, yes, that's true, but what we forget is that it was him that masterminded the 4-0 victory in the first leg, which was an absolutely stunning success, a really intense performance, and it was those performances that were actually alien to the PSG before he arrived. So he sort of transmitted what he'd worked on in Spain, this sort of high intensity, high pressure, and making his players really, really work to that plan. But it only works if everybody buys into it, and I think maybe that's where it fell apart a little bit in his final season, when you had a lot of players coming in and thinking, like, I know better than this, I'm going to do what's worked for me in the past. And that really, he wasn't cut out to deal with very egocentric individuals. And I think that maybe has proved to be a criticism in a way. But look, I mean, will that prove to be a problem at Arsenal? It's hard to say, but I don't think it will, because there's not a Neymar in the Arsenal dressing room. I think a lot of the players there are quite grounded comparatively, and I think that they will be open into buying into these new ideas. And of course, there'll be certain players that might not fit the style or fit the demands he will ask of. But ultimately, I think this is going to be an appointment which will have long-term benefits for Arsenal. I think he's going to have them pushing in the right direction. And we've said about before, like, there's a sporting director in place now. There's a structure. There's going to be, in terms of scouting and recruiting players, in terms of bringing young players on. I think this is the perfect coach, and I actually thought before he was more likely to go to Chelsea than to Arsenal, because Chelsea have sort of got that structure in place where they just want the coach to come in and improve players and work with what they have. Yeah. And Emery is somebody who's really excelled under that previously, but I think he can do it with Arsenal as well, and I think there's a lot of potential to certainly grow. And I mean, look, I don't think he's going to turn them into title challengers overnight. I don't think that will happen, but I think that there will be progress, and I think it will be clear fairly instantly that there's going to be a defined style and a defined recruitment method as well, which he'll be a part of.
Okay, well look, it does sound positive. as ever, I mean, this for many people is the first time they've seen a managerial change at Arsenal, but there can be shaky moments. I think what we're looking at is a club that's a competitive Europa League club, and we've brought in a very competitive Europa League manager at an age where I think he might be able to kick on as well in terms of his own career. So it sounds like it's going to be an interesting ride with Unai Emery. Colin, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure, Andrew. Thanks for having me on.
Colin is on Twitter at Miller_Colin. That is at Miller_Colin. And hopefully that's given you some insight into Unai Emery, the kind of man he is, the kind of manager he is. And it just adds to the excitement I think we're all feeling at this point. The fact that it's happened just at the end of the season, more or less, means we can actually start becoming impatient for the new season to begin, rather than this, okay, glad that season's over. Let's just take a bit of time to take stock, and we don't have to think about football too much over the course of the summer. Now it's like, bring it on, buy the players, sell the players, do the backroom staff, do the preseason games. Let's get ready. Let's play our first game already. Come on, where is it? Where is it? I need football again. We do have some time to wait, though. So, maybe I just need to relax a little bit. All good things come to those who wait, and soon enough we will be seeing Unai Emery on the touchline at Arsenal at the Emirates Stadium and across stadia in the Premier League, hopefully doing a fantastic job, winning games, making us tougher, more resilient, harder to beat, scoring goals, and making us more competitive again. That would be absolutely great to see. But in the meantime, we'll just, chill out. It's summer. Summer is arriving. The weather's going to be good. Time to, dust off the barbecue and all that kind of stuff. And we'll get there soon enough. But as ever, thank you for listening. James and I will be here on Monday with an Arsecast Extra. Until then, take it easy, folks. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Arsenal Football Club today announced the appointment of Spaniard Roberto Cerveza as new manager. He arrives with a stellar record from Costa del Sol FC, and Arsenal chairman Sir Chips Keswick outlined the decision-making process.
My mate Trev's got a timeshare in Malaga. This bloke's his next-door neighbour. Fixed the plumbing last year. Great lad.
Arsenal-branded sangria will be available from all concession stands from tomorrow.